Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We're talking about the Billy Meyer case this evening. And for some reason, yes, I didn't think I was coming through there. But yesterday I talked a bit about what the Meyer case calls the Destroyer Comet. The Destroyer Comet is no longer a threat to the people of the Earth. I believe it was either destroyed or just pushed way out of the current, or what was the orbit that was causing all the destruction. It's a very strange and very fascinating bit of information. The Meyer material says that 10,079 years ago, a flood took place here on the Earth, and this global catastrophe was caused by this gigantic comet, which threw the Earth out of its orbit. It also changed our orbital period and direction of rotation. So the Earth used to have a 40-hour day, and the sun did not rise from the east as it does today. So the orbital period was changed, the rotation direction was changed, and there was a massive flood here on the Earth. That's when this destroyer comet came through our system 10,000 years ago. It also came through 3,500 years ago, which we'll speak about in a minute. And for a while there, it had a really tight orbit of about 575 years, where it would come back through our system. The last time it came through the Sol system, as it's called, our solar system, was in 1680. There is a group of extraterrestrials called the Lyrians. They had settled on the Earth in the distant past, and they did something. It doesn't say what here, exactly what, but they did something which prevented this comet from completely destroying the Earth. My understanding is now the Plejaren have done something else, which makes it completely no longer a threat. But about 3,453 years ago, this comet brought with it the planet Venus. And the planet Venus had been following behind this comet, or being pulled along by this comet, for 130,000 years. The planet Venus was actually thrown out of the system that it was in. It was in a system very far, it says here, through the enormous power of this gigantic comet on the planetary system very far from the Sol system. A planet in the first stages of developing life was thrown out of its orbit. That's the planet Venus, and sent out into space on a parallel trajectory. It was moving parallel with the destroyer comet. The destroyer comet kind of pulled it into its tail. And 3,453 years ago, when the destroyer came through our system again, it shook the Earth very hard, causing huge storms and volcanic eruptions. The Earth was kind of wrapped in its tail, so to speak. Caused a lot of death of animals and people. And in the Mediterranean Sea, the Santorini volcano was torn down because of these gravitational effects, and large amounts of water entered into this volcano. This caused a huge disaster because the volcano exploded and destroyed the island that it was on. which created a storm surge that went some 2,000 meters into the sky. That's very nearly a mile up, and everything in its path was killed and crushed. Thereby, the waters turned red, and there we have the story in the Old Testament of the rivers turning blood. There was also, because of this storm surge in Egypt, there were all sorts of plagues that popped up because of this. So anyway, this is what brought Venus into our system at this time, and I guess our sun managed to pull Venus from the tail of this comet and deposit it as the second planet. Well, this destroyer comet also brought the moon in, our moon. Our moon is a satellite, or a part of it comes from a planet which is 4.5 million years older than the Earth. Let me continue here. Semyase says, surely, but I am not finished yet, because I would like to explain even more primordial things to you. The early history of this comet that is so faithful to the Earth, which has also brought satellites here, the moon, a fragment of a small planet from a very distant sun system. So this fragment, there was in another space-time sun-shifted system, there was a very dark star that had collapsed in on itself and compressed into what's sometimes called a brown dwarf or a white dwarf, depending on whether light can get out. This very compressed planet, a very compressed star, a single cubic centimeter weighed several thousand tons. And it existed, it floated along in a dark, gaping hollow in space. But eventually, this dark star got pulled into the force field of a giant sun, and it rotated this giant sun for thousands of years, until finally this dark compressed dwarf star got pulled into the giant star that it was orbiting around. And this caused a great explosion, which, well, before that explosion, what happened here? I'm getting way ahead of myself here. Just 1 second. This dark star eventually came into the orbit of a small planet that was circling this sun system. And the gravity of this dark star literally tore this dwarf planet apart. And one of the fragments became our moon. And I'm trying to find this exact place here. Well, let me just read a little bit here and we'll find out what's going on here. All right. In the force field of the giant sun, it circled many thousands of years along with its satellites, carrying with it the promise of someday bringing a catastrophe upon the system. Now, this is not our solar system. This is another solar system. Vast and inapproachable, it floated through the freezing cold of cosmic space as an outcast, as a wandering planet, as a stranger in the strange system, dark, dangerous, and deadly. This is this brown dwarf star, for lack of a better word. Under the spell of the far-reaching force arms of the sun, during the course of millennia, it approached more and more the actual area of the system's satellites. So it had a tighter and tighter orbit. It emerged from the blackness of space. And it says here, it was still removed by millions of units from the actual heart of the peaceful calm, which, however, on account of its enormous size, it would soon turn into a seething hell when it entered the stillness of the harmony. The stillness of the harmony, I guess, refers to the orbits of this other solar system, the planets. But time went by for the time being before the giant finally broke away from its path and came into dangerous proximity. Now already visible as a round sphere, the destroyer reflected the sunlight while pulling a fine veil of luminous particles behind it. Still only a few hundred units away from the nearest worlds, it caused storms. There were people on these worlds. On the night of the third day after the incursion of the destroyer into the orbit of the planets, it might have been shortly past midnight when the drifter from outer space penetrated into the elliptical orbit of the sixth planet, which caused gigantic storms. Mountains collapsed, seas hurled from their beds. Filled with horror, the people fled. 2/3 of the human beings on these other worlds were killed. We talk about another planet that it says the daily rotation time doubled. The planet circled the sun in the opposite direction. The destroyer, however, continued its incursion into the system, spreading hell, death, and destruction. Okay, this comet is in a completely other solar system, causing all kinds of destruction. Other planets, the fourth satellite of the system, however, would find its destruction on a war of the worlds. As the smallest of the planets, it stoically moved along. It would cross the path of the wanderer precisely as the latter would stand directly in front of it. So now this destroyer comet is right in front of this other smaller planet in this other solar system. But the two didn't collide. The smaller dwarf planet was ripped apart by the gravity of this dark star. And this is the part I want to get to, because this leads to our moon. Its fragments were hurled into the endless expanse of the universe. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself again. While they were captured by the forces of other stars and found their final end burning out in their atmospheres, additional parts of the dwarf were pulled into the sun and atomized, and other parts were drawn into the destroyer, becoming part of it. Okay, now here is the part that directly relates to our moon. Several, as if hurled by a giant fist, one half of the dwarf planet shot through a highly developed man-made dimension door in the infinite expanses of space in the Milky Way, a very distant destination. So we learn a couple of things here. One half of this dwarf planet was our moon, and it shot through this artificially constructed dimensional door. And I'm guessing, I don't know this for sure, that this door may have been built by the people from Lyra Vega. So several times it was shaken and pulled from its path in the vicinity of suns and planets, thereby changing its shape. After a few centuries, it had already reached a roughly round shape. So by this time, the half of the dwarf planet became roughly round. So it looks more like our moon. It was dead. It was desolate. Many small and large craters were in it. So at this point, I believe it's slowly drifting into our solar system. Remember, it was hurled through this dimension door, and eventually this half of the dwarf planet became rounded. When it interacted with other smaller asteroids and cosmic dust and things. Then the moon comes to the ancient Earth. And it says here, in describing the Earth, it says, through this, its course was once again slightly changed. As a result, became parallel to the path of the second planet. Our Earth at this time is the second planet, which had already begotten its first primitive life, a planet that was covered by vast seas and dense primeval forests, primitive, deadly, and gruesomely fantastic. From this point on, 34 days passed until the planet, namely the Earth, caught the dwarf and submitted it to its spell. The forces of the planet were enough to tie the dwarf to itself and let it circle around it as a new satellite on a constantly changing elliptical orbit. Since then, it orbits around the Earth as the moon, 4.5 million years older than its mother star. Now that would be an interesting thing to have verified, if our scientists can do that, verify the age of the moon. So that's basically the story as it relates to our solar system. And Contact Report 5 goes on to talk, and this is very interesting. I don't know how quite to present this material yet, but it tells the history of the Lyrians. Well, this one passage is kind of interesting. And there came a time when the descendants flew out into the infinite expanses of the universe with round, saucer-like ships with beam drives. By the way, we have scientists that are experimenting with beam drives in very beginning stages. These Lyrians had tremendous consciousness powers. They developed, let me read this, it's amazing. It says, they found many new habitable worlds and sun systems, and they often subjugated with their ray weapons in short one-sided battles in order to conquer them for the settlement of their race. So these Lyrians went out throughout the Milky Way galaxy, and they were still warlike. They conquered worlds. In addition to their monstrous material and genetic technique, they also perfected their consciousness and their spirit, and nothing they wanted to learn remained strange to them any longer. The use of their consciousness powers became self-evident to them, and so they rose more and more above the peoples to rule them. They called themselves kings of wisdom by the word JHWH, which translated on earth as God, far superior to the ordinary people in spirit and knowledge as well as in consciousness. They soon ruled it in an evil dictatorial form, but after many centuries, having grown tired of the godly scientists, the people rose against them in a silent revolution. But weighed down by the spiritual and consciousness-related powers and by the immense knowledge of the gods, the people were forced to submit to their rulers. However, the desire for freedom made them prepare for battle in secret. Like a smoldering ember, it glowed for 4 centuries, to conflagurate at a given moment as a wild, untamable blaze. And it was about 230,000 years ago that this war of liberation took place. There was a scientist named Asael who took a large fleet of ships, 183 great spacers, about 360,000 people. They wandered around the universe for quite a while. They came down and they settled on the Pleiadian system. But they also, at least here it says, they settled on Earth, Millennia, and Mars. But at that time, this was long ago, these planets, which were habitable, they were still very hostile. So they had power struggles between themselves. Eventually they left. Our space-time configuration and the worlds in our solar system. And I believe they settled on the Pleiadian system. And eventually, about 70,000 people left that system, and they were under the rulership of a Ishwish. Their supreme leader was named Pelagon, and he was freely recognized by all as JHWH, a god, and held strict rule. He had 200 sub-leaders, each of which was responsible for a specific field of knowledge. On the home planet, war broke out and much was destroyed again. However, the people finally reached freedom and peace. And I don't know if I passed over this. They were sub-gods. Okay, where I was saying that there were 200 sub-leaders and they were each responsible for a specific field of knowledge. They were sub-gods, so to speak, and they were also called guardians. Anyway, Pelagon and his groups, these 70,000 people, eventually settled on the Earth. And they were here for a couple thousand years. Before then, there was another war, and a lot of them left the Earth. Some of them died here on the Earth and became part of the reincarnational patterns on the Earth. Anyway, that was, and I apologize if that was a little disjointed. That's a lot of material. And, this is something you can study for a long time to really digest. Absolutely. But that's the story of the Destroyer Comet, which affected the people of Lyra Vega. It affected our solar system. It's probably where this whole notion of Planet X comes from. And I think the whole thing of Planet X is kind of, it's a collage of many things that have been confused together. And, it's been coming for how many years now, and it's never gotten here. But people still always talk about it. Very interesting thing. I think it's maybe part of our genetic memory, when actually it was this Destroyer Comet all along. I have a little bit of information on Sfath, Billy's earlier. There's a couple contact reports on Sfath and Billy, and I need to get my notes organized a little bit better to really understand this. Sfath, of course, met with Billy in about 1945. I think they had telepathic contacts probably in 42. Billy met with Sfath for 11 years. Sfath had saved his life when Billy was just 6 months old. Sfath was a human being, an extraterrestrial human who was nearly 1,000 years old, from the planet Lyra, and he came here as a mentor for Billy. He was Billy's first mentor, and he mentored Billy from about 1942 until 1953. And this is what Sfath had to say about Billy's mission. I'm going to read just a paragraph here. It says, "Because of your self-determination, which far precedes the present, you have entered a life as a proclaimer of the truthful creational laws and recommendations, and thus as a prophet. So Billy, in his previous lifetimes, has been many people here on the earth, but the people that we call Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad, to name a few. Whereby, however, you will only take up your actual mission and fulfill it when the time has become ripe for it, namely when the date of January 28th, 1975. So it had to be before there was Photoshop, which it was, so he could have these photos so people couldn't completely disregard it. And it had to be at roughly the beginning of the time of the internet, so the information wouldn't be lost. And Sfath told Billy he would have a very difficult life, and particularly told him that his wife would turn against him. And let me read this section. It says, "Unfortunately, she will, however, be so blinded by hate that she will covertly spread further slander about you and will practice intrigues against you. But you will not have to pit yourself against it if you are studious, as I instruct you to be." So Sfath goes on to tell him that his name, Edward, means guardian of the treasure, and that he will be called Beam, which means Billy Edward Albert Meyer. And Sfath tells him how he should interact with people, particularly of his group, and says, "But nevertheless be like a fire, and do not stay too far from them with the warmth of your love, so that they can come to you at any time and feel your warmth, sincerity, and love, as well as your peace, your freedom, your balance, and harmony." But Sfath told him not to keep the correct distance, because do not let them get so close and get too much information. Because it says here that we always, here on the earth, try to get more information than we can really handle. And it talks a little bit about that he'll have to charge for some of his materials in order to be able to survive in our economy, in our money system. And it talks about the spread of the spiritual teachings, which starts in 1975. It says, "Through the spiritual teachings, which you will teach and spread from 1975, the real truth and light shall come to the human beings, thereby fulfilling the earth human beings' deepest wishes for true love, freedom, for peace, and for harmony. For this spiritual teaching, which has been the teaching of Noka, Damien, Henak, and your former personalities." And maybe this would be a good time to talk about some of these former personalities, because Billy is called in many ways. Sometimes they call him the universal prophet. And Nokodamian. The Nokodamian lineage is what we're talking about here. And Nokodamian is a spirit form, a human being that actually lived 9.6 billion years ago. He was from a planet named Sadar, which existed some 3 billion light years from Earth in a different galaxy called the Lyran galaxy. And that was his first lifetime, or his most ancient lifetime, as a teacher. He was also had a series of lifetimes under the name Henok. And let me read what it says here in Contact. I think it's 228. It says, "Semyase and I, as well as Patan, his father Sfath, as well as my father, have always belonged to paternally to a line of descendants that lead back to Henok, Nokodamian, and their sons." So Billy's third contact, Semyase, her father Ptah, Quetzal, are all in this Nokodamian lineage. So that's one of the reasons they have contact with Billy, because they're related in terms of their former lifetimes. It says, for the spiritual teaching, which has been the teaching of Nokodami and Henoch, and your former personality since time immemorial, you should, as it was in all past times, only requires a reciprocal gift, a will to learn love, harmony, joy, diligence, humaneness. So Billy is a part of this long lineage of people. Sfath is. Sfath, Ptah, Semyase are all related as a part of the descendants that lead back to Henoch and Nokodamian. Interesting, some other personalities, former personalities of Edward Albert Meyer is one of these people in Atlantis times, Semyasa, and some others, a few others. You know, it's very, very interesting. When you get this much material, it's very, very challenging to keep it all organized. And I need to go back over some of this stuff because some of it seems... I'm digressing. Forgive me. Anyway, Billy also had to learn many different occupations. It says, moreover, your work will not be easy and limited to one occupation, because in order for you to master everything that you must master, you will learn and practice very many different occupations. His group was started in 1975. That's the people at the Semyase Silver Star Center, the people in the Figu. Sfath explains that our biggest problem here on Earth is the ignorance of the creation. What is the creation? The universe, the physical universe, is, you could think of the body of the universal consciousness. It has 7 counter-rotating belts, or 7 concentric circles. And the fourth belt, the fourth of these concentric circles, is called the material belt, and that's where all the matter, the stars, the galaxies exist. This is the structure of creation. Within the material belt, there are 7 different space-time configurations. And these space-time configurations, in some ways, are similar to each other. The Pleiaren come from a different space-time configuration than our space-time configuration. But they have similar star systems, like the Sirius system and Lyra Vega system. So in the fourth layer, the fourth belt, the solid state matter universe belt, this is where all the planets, the suns, the galaxies, the meteors, the gases, the dark matter, and all that sort of stuff. The matter can only be about 45 billion years old, can't get any older than that, because it transforms back into energy. Now, there's something called the Earth space belt, and positive energies come out of the Earth space belt, which is belt 3, and move into belt 4. There's something called the transformation belt, which is belt 5. And negative energies come out of the transformation belt. And in the material belt, the negative and the positive energies combine and eventually form a different kind of energy, which eventually becomes material. So this is part of the law of harmony in action, because you always have to have the negative and the positive together. And this is part of us understanding how to control our thinking, because that's one of the challenges. It's a very, very big challenge, learning to truly be neutral positive in your thoughts. And being neutral positive in our thinking is a requirement that we have as a part of living the spiritual life. And we have something called the Might of Thoughts, this book that I've been talking about for quite some time. And it has a whole series of principles in it. 7 I just kind of pulled out myself from my personal reading. How do you know if you're a neutral positive in your thinking? Well, your thoughts will be confident, optimistic, relaxed, cheerful, thankful, enthusiastic, and harmonious. And you can pull those all out of the Might of Thoughts book from pages about 200 to 230, and then probably a little jumping around besides that as well. There's another very important concept called the innermost personality, which is related to our spirit form. And it's talked about on page 390. On the one hand, it says, let me start back a little earlier. It says, through the consciousness awake ability to assess, the human being is able to distinguish the various impulses and values of the innermost nature from the self-created personality. So we have a self-created personality. We have an innermost creational nature. The innermost creational nature impulses, radiates to what you might consider your normal personality. On the other hand, okay, let me continue here. We need to distinguish the various impulses and values of the innermost nature from the self-created personality, so that he or she therefore learns to recognize the various forms of characteristics which on one hand radiate as guiding impulses from his innermost creational nature, or which on the other hand attempt to drown out everything. So your ego, the self-created I, will tend to drown out everything with piercing, often loud, seductive voices from the self-created I. So we have these two natures, which you could say are kind of warring against each other in some ways. It's really hard to understand all of the intricacies of this, because what we're trying to do is create a harmony, because it is the nature of thoughts that by their power alone, every conceivable thing can be brought into fruition. So every achievement of a capability means that a battle must be fought with yourself, which is very interesting. That's on page 360, I believe. And I'll read some other ideas. When tensions, conflicts, and confusions and so forth provoke the human being, then the personality, which functions as a unity comprising the inner nature and consciousness, does not function in a form which is healthy, corrective, progressive, and effective. Therefore, a corrective element is required by means of which the disadvantage is resolved. But this can only be harmony, which once it is created as an ability. However, battles, tensions, obstacles can often be much more easily won, conquered, and overcome when the necessary equalizedness of the conscious and of the thoughts is first of all acquired, whereby a corresponding harmony and optimism likewise will follow. But that also means that many battles, tensions, and obstacles only arise because the human being does not create harmony in himself or herself, or simply drops out of harmony and thereby sinks into pessimism. So we want to be confident, optimistic, relaxed, cheerful, enthusiastic, and then harmonious and thankful as well. Therefore, harmony also has effect on work. So if you harmonious internally, that helps the laws of striving. And as a result of harmony, the consciousness and its thoughts, as well as the life and the work, they tend to flow in a stream which is extremely pleasant for the human being and rather progressive. So we have the law of harmony. We have several different laws, creational natural laws. The first of all is the law of love. The second is the law of striving. The third is the law of harmony. And the fourth is the law of prosperity and abundance. So if you follow the law of love, which refers to the highest form of love, it's called effective love. The love is the highest principle in all creation, and through it, everything exists in absolute logic. So everything on the earth exists for a purpose in absolute logic. For example, the trees, the gigantic forests that we're destroying exist there to moderate the weather through keeping it cool in the summertime through shade. They also do not reflect back a lot of light. They have a low albedo, I guess, so they keep it warmer in the winter. So the trees, the forests, have a function in creation. Remember, love is the highest principle in all creation, and through it everything exists in absolute logic. So every plant, every tiny animal fulfills its purpose in love. All of these parts of nature have a purpose and a logical purpose. So we can't eliminate things from nature without upsetting this delicate balance. That's why I say the bulldozer is about as dangerous as the atomic bomb in some ways. It's probably done more to destroy this harmony that nature naturally creates. So understanding the importance of the creation is one of the things that we have to strive to do. Remember, we talk about the law of striving, which is a fundamental law of all evolution. Without striving, there is no life. If you break down in your striving, that will lead to disharmony and unhappiness in your life. Striving means life. Striving means delectation in a form which is always fulfilling and progressive. To be without striving means unwillingness and affliction. Affliction is inhabited striving and inhabited life. But inhibited striving and inhibited life bring inhibited evolution, stagnation, hopelessness, grief, confusion, irrationality, and many other negative things that you should try very hard to avoid. You don't want to have the negative side effects of not doing enough striving. Also, in regards to the law of love, I want to read something for you that's important. It says, a righteous human being never boasts about his merits, nor about his or her deeds, nor about his or her work or his intelligence. That's part of the law of harmony and the law of love. The law of harmony is the bipolar structure and composition of everything that exists. Remember, I talked about the negative energies which come in from the transformation belt and the positive energies which come in from Earth space, form themselves, converge in the material belt of our universe. The same way we have a law of harmony, we should have harmony in our thinking. That means we're not negative. We're not too positive. We have confidence, optimism. We're relaxed. We're cheerful. We're thankful. We're enthusiastic. We're harmonious. That's the law of harmony fulfilled. And if you follow and live in the law of love, the law of striving, the law of harmony, then typically the law of prosperity and abundance will be fulfilled in your life, every life form, and therefore also the human being has everything in plentiful abundance in order to be able to live, survive without having a sense of want. So this is part of the law of prosperity. So these are the principles of the universe, the principles that we have to follow to be happy and productive in our lives. Remember that the purpose of our life is to gather wisdom, to evolve our consciousness. And in order to do that, we have to live many, many lifetimes, and that involves the reincarnation cycle of life and death. And one of the most important skills you can learn in this life is organization. Organization will help you with your striving, with your harmony, with your love, and your prosperity. I had talked a little bit about earlier about the universal prophet and the genealogy of Edward Albert Meyer and how it is related to these people he's having contacts with. That they're all somehow related to this Nocodamian lineage. Semyase, Quetzal, Ptah, Sfath, and perhaps even Asket. I'm not sure about that. Henoch, there was a Henoch spelled with a K. He was born 8 billion years ago. He's called the wise man of time, the initiate. There were 2 Semyases that appeared. One of them was part of the lineage and the other one wasn't. I don't know exactly which one it was. There was Semyasa, who was here about 389,000 years ago during the time of the Lyrians and fathered the first Adam. Semyasa II, sometimes refers to as a demigod, was here during the time of Atlantis and Lemuria. He was a scientist who worked under Eris the Barbarian. He fathered the second Adam. I think that was 13,000 years ago. One of these 2 wasn't in the Nocodamian lineage. I couldn't tell you exactly which. The Contact Report 9 talks about Semyasa as the highest leader of the sub-leaders who mated with an Eva and produced an Adam, an earth human being. Henoch the first, about 13,500 years ago. The Henoch prophecies tell us about the troubles that will occur here in the U.S. that are starting now. Henoch 1, 2, 3, and 4 are part of the Nocodamian lineage. A guy named Elijah or Elijah was flown to Srinagar, Kashmir in India by beam ship April 7th, 842 BC. Contact 230 talks about the predictions of the prophet Elijah. I think that would be a good side study to go in and look into this Elijah or Elijah and his trip on the beam ship. I think in the Bible it may have been called a chariot. Interesting that the creator of the universe has a chariot. Very strange. Isaiah 772 BC, Jeremiah, the one raised by the gods, born in 662 BC. Again, these are part of the lineage of the Nocodamian lineage. Socrates, born in 469 BC, Aristotle, born in 384 BC. These were all former personalities of Edward Albert Meyer. Emmanuel, unfortunately called Jesus today. Muhammad, whose teachings were very twisted, and the history regarding him is very twisted and is no longer accurate. Johann Georg Faust was another people in the Nocadamian lineage, the former personalities of Edward Albert Meyer. Galileo Galilei, born in 1564, mentioned in the Wikipedia as an astronomer, physicist, and engineer. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart would be another one. Mendelssohn, Rasputin, and that was Billy's former life. Lived around 1915. He was born in 1869 as a Russian peasant. I think died around 1915. He was a friend of Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia. Interesting that one of the great in the third millennium, Russia is like the center of where the spiritual teachings will eventually take off. Now, we are very close on time, and I'll just cover this very, very quickly, and it's a tremendously difficult subject in many ways. We are able to create what are called Wesenheitens that come to life through the power of our own thoughts and feelings. It's not something we do on purpose. It occurs spontaneously. And that the word create is not the right word. The human being in question makes or prepares it, which is why it's like the sperm that leads to the child. The human being doesn't actually create a child, and likewise, these Wesenheiten are sometimes created through unconscious powers. So, be careful. You should not be involved in some of the activities that people are involved in. I'll probably leave it at that. There is something called the we form. We are building a we form in our material subconscious and our spiritual connectedness. The people on the earth are connected subconsciously. We are connected more or less with one another through our thoughts and feelings, as well as through our subconscious. And I think your good thinking can have a very positive effect on others, which you may never even come into contact with. It says here, so many of your fellow human beings very often have thoughts and feelings in them or carry out actions that in their origin lead back to you yourselves, and that through the strengthening take effect in the others and call forth the corresponding reactions. So I think your negative thoughts and your positive thoughts have effect, so it'd be, of course, much better to maintain neutral positive thinking, and that will affect this we form. One of the other principles I'll cover quickly as we are running down on time here is the fulfillment of your duty to yourself. It's talked about in the book The Way to Live. Always care for the health of your body and your psyche. Do not disregard the health of your consciousness. Do not devote yourself to your passions, to your lusts, to your vices and addictions. It says here, whoever devotes him or herself to the passion and incessantly sets the sails of his or her lust, vices, and addiction finally runs through the smoldering desert, dying of thirst. If you do not continually pay attention to yourself, and do not fulfill your duty to yourself, then you can even end in misery and end up with suicidal thoughts, which are not infrequent. Therefore, never do hidden things about which you would feel ashamed in the eyes of a stranger. That's something to think about. Always speak the truth openly and unvarnished, even if many are not able to hear it and object about it. Always act, think, feel, and speak in good form and decently, because otherwise you forfeit your self-esteem. Your clothes also speak for you accordingly. Should always form your exterior according to your innermost. So don't let yourself appear ragged. Well, these are some quick little things to think of. I hope you've enjoyed the show. There's always valuable information here. I want to thank you for listening and thank all the people listening to the archives. You've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Have a great day.